Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Wen-Chi Yu. Today's guest is Dr. Evan Medeiros. He recently authored a paper to examine the domestic politics of U.S.-China relations. So what is the objective of this paper?
So this paper has two goals. Number one, to identify and analyze the changing sources, domestic sources, and forces influencing America's relationship with China, and to do the same thing on the Chinese side. So it was very much about identifying what's going on in the US and identifying what's going on in China.
You said both parties now see China as a vehicle for taking policy actions that support their longstanding political and domestic priorities, and both sides get something out of competition with China. So, what do both political parties get out of competition with China?
Well, the point I was trying to make there was first and foremost the increase in congressional activism. The fact that Congress is more interested in China and more active in China is due first and foremost to the fact that they see a greater number of threats and challenges emanating from China. Their views of China and the China challenge have changed, and as a result, they want to be more active. But there's also a related one, which is a more political motive. In other words, there may be members of Congress who aren't particularly focused on China. They don't have expertise on China, but they know that focusing on China will help them gain broad congressional support for their domestic agendas. And that domestic agenda could be more spending on clean energy. It could
Mhm.
be greater social welfare spending, assistance to American workers, positioning America to compete with China over the long term is a
Right.
big motivation in which there's bipartisan support. And if both parties are able to use that to gain support for very specific domestic initiatives, members of Congress are happy to do that as well.
So you've also noted in the report the changes in China's domestic politics, the more recently, sort of the two features, centralization and politicization. So how big is Xi Jinping's role in all this?
I mean, Xi Jinping has a very big role. He has the biggest and most important role. I mean, he is centralized decision making within the Central Committee apparatus for most decisions, foreign policy and domestic affairs. But foreign policy decisions are especially centralized under Xi Jinping. For Xi Jinping, domestic affairs and foreign affairs are inextricably linked. You can't really divide them up. And the
Hmm.
fact that Xi Jinping is now focused not just on growth, but priorities like national security and self-sufficiency are a reflection of how he sees the external environment. He's starting to rewire and reconfigure the Chinese economy for that long-term competition with the United States. I think the United States and China remain interdependent economically, ecologically, technologically, and in other ways. Our two-way trade relationship is somewhere between $600 and $700 billion. So that is real and that is meaningful. The question for the United States and China is how are we going to balance our growing number of diplomatic and security disagreements with our economic interaction?
So what would you predict for the next 18 months of US-China relations, and especially if there's another Trump administration?
If Trump gets elected, we should expect a lot of uncertainty and volatility. His people have also already talked about massive increases in tariffs toward China, for
Hmm.
example, right? So that's a possibility that's out there. No, if Trump doesn't get elected, I think the Biden policy of managed competition will continue, and I think the Chinese will try and extend further this sort of current era of dialogue and stability in the relationship.
So what would be your advice to, let's say, governments in the region, let's just say Taiwan, to prepare for a potential Trump administration? What do they need to do?
Well, to me, the two key strategies are always resilience and diversification, right? Diversify so you're not dependent on any one person. For Taiwan on the defense side, that's obviously difficult because the United States
Yeah.
is its biggest defense partner. But one of the most interesting things about the Taiwan issue in recent years is that it's really become a global issue. And there are European countries as well as Asian countries, American allies and partners that care a lot about Taiwan. So Taiwan has more friends and more influential friends than ever before. And I think that's a good thing for Taiwan, and that's a good thing for cross-strait relations because it contributes to strategic deterrence. So if I'm Taiwan, I want to make sure that I continue to invest in those relationships with the UK, with France, with Germany, with the European Union in Brussels, Japan, South Korea, Central European states, Australia. I think that can only be good and important for Taiwan.